the mind and life present us many problems. You try to remember something and you can't, or the mind forces you to remember something or someone you'd rather forget, and the thought of it or them doesn't go away. Men manipulate women into having sex with them. Women manipulate men into giving them things for free. We are trapped in a game for survival. We must eat, have clothing and shelter, educate ourselves, work and compete with those around us on a daily basis. We feel that if we don't win these games, we'll either die or go insane, and there is a real danger of both. Life is full of conflict. Conflict over trying to convince others our point of view is the correct one, as in matters of opinion, or that we are the ones in charge, as in matters of power, or that we deserve to be taken care of, as in matters of survival. So, what's behind all of this? Not reason necessarily, though reason can resolve some of this mess, even if just for our own sakes. Behind all of it are desires, and those desires which are most fundamental to us are the desires to know and desire to be known. And in the game of life, we come to learn of two other desires, and they are those of the desire to not know and to not be known. We call such desires postulates. There are many such postulates we can make, but each of them have an element of at least one of these four basic ones. But, you may ask, how could any rational being want to not know things? Because life is a game, and to have a game there has to be an element of not knowing to it, or you'd be able to predict every move on both sides, and you would have no game at all. Also, games, strictly speaking, are irrational activities. Doesn't mean you're crazy to want to play one. Games are fun and life should have some fun in it. But don't go thinking games are entirely based on reason, because they are not. You play a game of chess. The goal is to force your opponent into a situation where he has no move that could save his king. Well, why not just take the king off the board and declare that you've won? Why don't you both do that and say that you've both won? You aren't going to do that. Instead, you agree on rules that will prevent that. You play a game where the pieces are known, your opponent's strategy is not known, and you don't make your strategy known to him. And in developing your strategy, you learn, or come to know, ways of defeating your opponent and ways of defeating other opponents. Now, you could take chess to a no-game condition by just sitting across from each other and admiring the board, saying, "Look at how pretty all the pieces are." And a good time could be had of that, even if for a minute or two. You could talk about the game of chess with each other, and you could have communication. But if you start arguing over who is the better player, then decide to play, you've gone into a voluntary games state. This game could become compulsive. However, if you bet your grocery money on who wins or enters tournaments and measure your sense of self-worth by your ranking, you could go insane over chess, getting violent over a defeat by a player that you just know is not as good as you are, still believing you are the best chess player ever, even though there is someone capable of beating you. Or worse, you could convince yourself that you won the game when you actually didn't. My chess analogy is not that far from what happens to you as a spiritual being, and how you've become trapped into the compulsion to play games. And it is the compulsion to play games that is the trap, not the games themselves necessarily. Though I do want to inject here that there are games that are mostly compulsive by their very nature, like sex, war, and arguing on social media. But try telling someone that a chessboard is a trap, and they will likely laugh at you. Still, you could end up trapped in a compulsion to play chess. We get into things, and hopefully we can get out of them too, provided we know how. TROM will show you how. TROM is not the first subject to view life as a game, but the idea that you can end the game you are playing with your mind is a novel one indeed. So what does all this have to do with the mind? Well, you have a goal, intention, purpose, postulate, something you'd like to see manifest in the universe. Let's say you fail. Just because you failed, it doesn't necessarily mean your purpose, or in other words your postulate, just went away and vanished. It most likely did not. It remains in your mind where the game is still being played. Suppose you have a breakup. It's not likely you'll say, "Well, that's over," and go your merry way. Instead, you'll try to reconcile in your mind the postulate you had to be happy with this person, and how reality is shoving it right in your face that you failed, and you were wrong to ever think that. This postulate failure unresolved affects your thinking and your actions in the future. You try and forget about it, and your mind keeps reminding you of it. It's a game of you against your mind, and one you are losing. Why does this happen? Because you consider the whole matter important. And considering something to be important to you with one hand and trying to get rid of it with the other is futile. Realizing this on some level or other, you try and consider the matter unimportant. That doesn't work, because considering that something is unimportant is an assignment of importance in its own right. Seems like an irreconcilable mass, doesn't it? But it's not. In TROM, we practice what's called time breaking. You take something from the past and experience it at the same time as the present, and compare its importance to the importance of the present. You don't do this with some psychological process of asking yourself, "What does this all mean?" Then search for some ridiculous explanation like your mother weaned you too early and therefore you pick wrong sexual partners. Instead, you learn and use a systematic method of handling the upset so it troubles you no more. Since the importance of one thing is relative to another, comparing the past to the present while viewing them simultaneously lessens the importance of the past, and thus the past is no longer forcing you to know it, and you can now not know it, or in plainer words, forget about it like you intended. This technique I just described to you requires some TROM exercises to prepare yourself to do this effectively. But this is essentially what we do in TROM, the simultaneous viewing of then and now, and it's done for the purpose of reducing the importance of the past. And don't worry, the memory is still there, the upset is not. Now, because we are removing past upsets from the mind and literally removing small portions from it, in order to maintain mental balance, the person first learns to create mental masses of his own. Now, when I say masses, I just mean solids as in the real world, or pieces of one's mind as in the mental plane. I don't mean masses of things as in quantity. Make that distinction so you don't misunderstand me. The being, by time-breaking events, loses mental mass, and if he does not replace that lost mental mass with mental mass of his own, he becomes a vacuum for upset. Think of it as your mind being a prison, and you remove a brick from the wall of your cell and replace it with an imaginary brick of your own. You still get the same secure feeling of your prison cell, but you are actually closer to being free from it. And one day you won't feel compelled to stay in this prison any longer. You'll escape from it with a bunch of imaginary bricks to play with. I know what I say sounds comical, but for those of you who are familiar with Stockholm Syndrome, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if all this sounds like playing games with your mind, you would be right. You start by feeding the mind mental masses to satisfy your compulsion to have them. Then you remove mental masses, or in plainer terms, upset, from the mind and replace what's lost with non-upsetting mental mass. You voluntarily play games with the mind, doing the exercises to end your compulsion to play games with it in life until you arrive at a state where there is no game. But you could play one if you wanted to. And that is TROM.